How do these ND filters for the DJI Neo compare when you look at them side by side? And which filters work best in which modes? We're going to revisit my last video and do a side-by-side comparison of each shot to find out. I've done extensive testing of different ND filters for different drones. And in my most recent video for the DJI Neo, I asked you to decide which ND filters looked best. Now, in previous videos about ND filters, I've always done side-by-side clips. It offers a direct comparison and also really annoys my editor. But in last week's video, I decided to eschew this process, opting for a more subjective approach, which allows us to decide which one just looks best. But I did get several comments saying they wished I'd done a side-by-side comparison. And being the dutiful content creator that I am, I have reacted and I've got my editor to do that for you. He wasn't happy, but he was very rude to me last week, so he deserves it. It's also rubbish weather at the moment, so I couldn't really go out and do a video, so I decided to do this instead. There are two sets of ND filters available from Freewell. The standard 3-pack consisting of an ND8, 16 and 32, and the Bright Day 3-pack with the same strength settings, but as polarized filters. They're currently £19.99 and $19.99, available from Amazon and the Freewell store. But actually on the Freewell store, they do an all-day pack with both sets of filters for $35.99, giving you a saving of 10%. I am duty bound to say that Freewell did send me these filters for no charge and for purposes of review, but no money changed hands and I retained full editorial independence of the content. If you do want to pick some up, please use the affiliate links below. The channel gets a tiny kickback from it and at no extra charge to you. So anything I do get goes back into supporting the channel.
Stop trying to flog stuff and get on with it.
Okay, let's dive in and have a look at the comparisons. We're going to compare the shots I did for the standard ND filters and then the polarized filters. And I'll also be showing you a comparison between those types of filters as well. We'll do this in automated mode, but also in manual flight mode using the DJI RC2. I decided to use the Boomerang shot for the automated mode to get a variety of heights and distances. One thing to note here is that the sun for the no filter shot wasn't quite as intense as with the other shots, so you do need to bear that in mind. In general, there isn't a great amount of difference, although it does seem that there is slightly more contrast and better saturation with the ND filters. Moving on to the polarized filters, we can see here a definite increase in contrast and saturation. And to round off the automated mode comparisons, here are the ND8 and ND32 filters compared with the polarized versions. Again, we can see that the greens are generally greener and the blues are bluer. But as I said in the previous video, the polarizing effect is dependent on the drone's position to the light source, and also how you've rotated the filter, because different polarizing effects happen at different rotations of the filter. So before flying, it's best to experiment by just having a look at the picture on your controller or on your phone and altering the filter that you've got on the drone itself. Now, before we move on to the manual flight section, could I just ask you that if you're enjoying this, please hit the like button. And also, if you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe. It really does help the video out and get it out to more people who might find it useful and helps the channel in general. Thank you very much. So moving over to manual control using the DJI RC2, I wanted to find out if these filters made any difference with motion blur. Now, I was using a frame rate of 30 frames per second, which is the Neo's native frame rate. So to get the optimal motion blur, I had to set my shutter speed to 1/60. This is also known as the 180-degree shutter rule. The trouble with slowing down your shutter speed is that more light The trouble with a slow shutter speed is that more light hits the sensor, causing an overexposed picture, which is why we use the ND filters to restrict the amount of light coming in. It's one of the primary uses for ND filters and is used normally when you're doing low-level flying or for shots where there's a lot of movement. For higher altitude shots, an ND filter isn't as necessary, but in general, an ND32 tends to live on most of my drones anyway. So here we have the footage in manual mode. You can see here that the ND8 footage is rather overexposed for these conditions, with the ND16 and ND32 providing the best results. If we just rewind and go back to the beginning of this shot and freeze the video, we can see the motion blur effect. Because the shutter speed in auto mode without the ND filter on is so high, everything is very sharp. You wouldn't know that this was a frame taken from something that was moving. As we progress through the different strength of ND filter, we can see increasing levels of motion blur conveying the speed of the drone in that freeze frame. Whilst this might not seem to make much difference in the video, subconsciously the human eye finds this effect more pleasing and natural. A much overused word for this is cinematic. Using the polarized filters, we get the same effect, but again with a boost in saturation depending on the direction you're flying. You can also see better definition in the clouds and a pronounced deeper blue in some parts of the sky. With other drones, I would normally use waypoints to track exactly the same path at exactly the same speed, but because the DJI Neo doesn't have this function, I had to manually control it in sport mode, which was a little challenging to say the least, especially as it was slightly windy. Now comparing what I felt were the best ND strengths, ND16 and ND32, we can see the polarizing effect in this comparison, with the polarized filters on the bottom half of the screen. With the polarized filters, we're still getting that all-important cinematic motion blur. With these specific conditions and having watched the video back, I think I'd like something just in between the ND16 and ND32. And we can achieve this by taking an ND16 and just stacking the ND8 on top of it. You do need to be careful when you do this with the polarized filters though, and they need to be lined up in exactly the same way, otherwise you can get some really weird effects. So there's a common saying in photography, the best camera is the one that you have with you. And that's the same with drones and accessories. There are many different opinions about whether ND filters are worth it or not, and no one opinion is right or wrong. It just all depends on what you're trying to achieve and the look that you're going for. Can you get better results with ND filters? Yes, but they won't perform miracles. The results can be subtle, and you have to take into account the conditions, the setup, and ultimately the look that you're going for in your footage. Bye!